Good evening to our Columbia community and welcome to the Columbia College Women Author Series. Tonight's event features Abby White, Columbia College class of 2019, author of DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T, with author Natachi Mez, Columbia College class of 2019. Thank you so much for joining us. I am TJ Givens, Columbia College class of 2019, and the programming co-chair for Columbia College Women, the official alumni organization for the college. The mission of Columbia College Women is to amplify the voices and leadership of women at Columbia College and across the university. We are committed to fostering a dynamic community that supports alumni and students throughout their lives. I'll be your moderator for tonight. More about tonight's conversation. You are truly in for a treat. This is a conversation between Abby and Natachi. All three of us actually are Columbia College class of 2019, and they'll discuss White's debut novel, DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T, a heartfelt story about grief, friendship, first crushes, and finding your voice after loss. And if you haven't yet, you can purchase DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T through your favorite bookseller or on the Politics and Prose site, and the link will appear in your chat box at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, let me introduce our Columbia participants. Abby White began to write as a child in Shaker Heights, Ohio, and never managed to put down her pen. She studied creative writing and American Studies at Columbia University and is now an MFA candidate at the University of Nevada, Reno. Abby loves books, baking, LeBron James, and elephants, so much that she's willing to break an alliteration for them. Today, she lives in Washington, D.C., with an extraordinary community of friends. DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T, as mentioned, is her debut novel. Welcome, Abby. Natachi Mez seeks to nourish. She is a Nigerian-American writer, performer, teaching artist, and MC from the Sacramento area in California. Through improvisation, call and response, and collective breathing, Natachi facilitates dynamic experiences that deepen audience engagement and celebrate community voices. Natachi works as a business program manager focusing on community building, communications, intercultural awareness, and design, and is almost always ready to hop into the dance circle. Let's get started for this wonderful conversation. I personally can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. Over to you, Natachi. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you so much, TJ. And oh my goodness, is that my friend Abby White?
Is that Natachi Mez? Oh my goodness, is this Hartley Hall?
Right, it's a throwback. For those who don't know, Abby and I were roommates freshman year and got to meet actually during days on campus.
Yeah, we met
April
orientation.
2015.
Yes.
Before we
Yes.
even committed to going to Columbia College. But at some point we decided, hey, it's time to be roommates. Let's do this. And so actually this year is our 10-year friendship anniversary. So I feel like this is such a beautiful thing to be doing to mark 10 years of friendship, even though I know this book does not exist but as a response to our friendship, but as your friend, it is such an honor to get to celebrate such a dynamic and beautiful and deep creation that you've made. And I feel like this year has been pretty, oh, you're so welcome. I feel like this year has also been really special for our friendship. I think it might be the most we've seen each other since we graduated in 2019.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so 3 times in person this year in 3 different cities.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're based in DC, where I am in Sacramento, and in Chicago on one of your book tour stops. So it's been great.
And let's be clear, since Natachi is unfailingly humble, she flew to Chicago from Sacramento to see my book event. Let's just be clear about what kind of friend she is.
And I brought friends with me.
She did. She rolled up. It was amazing.
And everyone was tapped in. They were locked in with your book talk. So it's also really special that I get to talk to you about your book as well. And before we get into diving into what we have gathered here, oh my gosh, I would actually love for us to start with a deep breath. An inhale on a 4 count and an exhale on a 4 count. So whoever is joining us today, welcome. And I invite you to breathe with us too. So I will say inhale, count to 4, exhale, count to 4 to let it out. Sound okay? So inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Abby, I feel like with the book that you created, you also created something that reminds us to breathe. But before we get deeper into that, I would love for you to introduce your book to us. Can you tell us a bit more about DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T?
I would love to. I also love you incorporating breath like that because it is actually a big motif in DJ. So, DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T, as has been mentioned, is my debut novel. It's a younger YA novel. It's about 14-year-old DJ who is investigating the mysterious death of her beloved older cousin Rachel while navigating a new school in town, crushes, friendships, trying to support a really messy family in the wake of this tragedy, and also studying for her belated bat mitzvah. So she's got a lot of challenges, some of which we might be familiar with on this call, and some of which are a little more specific to her. But it goes in some unexpected directions, and I think the book holds a lot for readers.
Unexpected is right. One unexpected detail, which is not a spoiler alert, so don't be afraid, anyone who has not read the book yet, is there was a moment in the book where you were like, ew, Ohio. Which I would have never imagined you would to say. And so you were showing a lot of Indiana love. So shout out to that.
Yeah, I should say for context, I grew up in Ohio. I'm very proudly from Cleveland. But DJ moves into suburban Ohio at the start of this book, but she's from Indianapolis, and if you're from the Midwest, Midwestern states are very proud of themselves. They're proud of their people and their communities. And I had to be true to the character. So DJ finds her place in Ohio, but it takes a minute.
Well, I love your commitment to the
Thank you
book
so
and to the
much.
realities of Midwestern living. But can you also tell us a bit more about what kind of impact do you hope this book to have on its
Oh my
readers?
gosh. I think more than anything, this is a book about different kinds of love. It's a book about love for friends and finding hope and help in them. It's a love for family and the ways that that can become strained but also strengthened. And it's most specifically about keeping love in the present tense, even when the person has passed. More than anything, this is about a 14-year-old girl who is grieving for this person she was very close to, her older cousin Rachel. And I really hope this book allows people to see themselves in the story, see the different kinds of love they feel there. Um, I think I am especially passionate about this reaching young people who have struggled with grief, struggled with mental health, as DJ does, but also Jewish communities, queer communities who are all represented in the book, and really just everybody who needs reminders, especially in this pretty difficult time that we're in, that love is what carries all of us forward in the dark moments.
Thank you so much for that, Abby. And I'm curious for you too. Why is it meaningful for these readers and audiences to see themselves in text? Why do you hold that with such significance?
I think it's a huge part of how people become who they're meant to be. I think that we we've seen on a political level that representation has its strengths and its things that it can't quite do. But I think in arts, media, entertainment of all kinds, people really need to be able to see themselves within worlds in order to imagine the possibilities that they can pursue. And so it was incredibly important for me to make DJ's world a diverse one at different levels. It's diverse in the sense that DJ herself is a bisexual Jewish teenager. It's diverse in the sense that she's the daughter of a single mom who is a lesbian and who chose to use IVF and sperm donation to have a kid. It's diverse in the sense that she lives in a diverse community with all sorts of different races, religions, nationalities, and other backgrounds. Her friend group spans a lot of different identities. It was especially important for me to include a trans character who is just fabulous and living their life in a wonderful way, living her life. And it is diverse in terms of, I think, some of the specific communities that are represented. One thing that I held really close was representing a diverse Jewish community. I feel so much love within my Jewish upbringing and Jewish family, and there's a common portrayal of American Jews being predominantly white, and predominantly from an Ashkenazi Eastern European background. And that has some truth to it, especially historically. But, first of all, there are actually so many different Jews of color and Jews from Sephardic, Mizrahi, and other backgrounds who are underrepresented in most modern media. And I really wanted them to have inclusion and have a voice in the story. And also, I think that our community is becoming more and more diverse. There are more and more relationships across faiths, across, race and ethnic boundaries. And that's been one of the most beautiful trends to see in the modern American Jewish community. And so I really wanted to have a book that not only spoke to the American Jewish community now, but spoke to the American Jewish community that will be. And that is only becoming more inclusive and more vibrant. And so I think the community in the book will last because of that.
I love that so much, Abby. Thank you so much. And you could really feel the depth and range of cultures. And I feel like you take such care in building your characters and the vibrant worlds that they come from, and you can really feel it in the text.
Thank you.
And I want the people to feel the text, because I have felt the text. Okay, I have felt the text. The tears that were coming out of me the morning I finished this book were not cute at all. I'll tell you that. But I will say, even with the emotions I felt, and to get to that point of crying, there was a lot of gratitude I was feeling, a lot of awe at the depth of the relationships, the love and moments of tenderness, even after grief. So it was very dynamic, complex feelings I was having, even though the tears were coming out. But Abby, can you give us a little taste, a little taste of your writing?
A little taste, a little nosh. I would love to. Thank you, and thank you for those kind words. I went back and forth on what to read today. But I think I'd like to read to you all just the very end of chapter 1, so we're not giving away too much. At this point, DJ and her mom have moved in with her aunt and uncle's family in suburban Ohio. This is Rachel's parents and Rachel's younger sibling, Davy. And I'm just going to give you a little taste of this new world DJ is encountering and what she's thinking about as she arrives in this new place.
And Abby, for those who might be reading along, can you let us know the page as well?
Oh my gosh. If you're reading along, I am on page 13. Lucky 13.
Thank you.
Excellent question. Okay. Mom leaves the door of my bedroom cracked. I've got a message from my best friend Eva. How's the estate? She's using a filter to make her face look like a cartoon. Big brown eyes, straight-lined eyebrows, and smooth dark skin, now with a synthetic shine. I reply with a filter that surrounds me with flames. Everything is fine. Seconds later, she sends back a laughing face. At least Eva is acting like everything is normal, even though we both know she's lying. My cousin Davy is stacking Legos in his playroom. A fin is beginning to take shape. Dolphin? I ask. Shark. He looks insulted. That's obvious. Not till it has teeth. When it does, it'll come after you. Oh no! Ah! I mock swim out of the room. Davy's laugh carries behind me. He's fine-ish. These days, ish is pretty good. I turn my music back on and approach the stairs. And that's when I see it. The door at the end of the hallway, tall and painted like the sky. Its clouds are plush, its blue is pale. A beaded sign on the brass doorknob reads, "Head in the clouds, don't bring me down." Bile sprints up my throat. The song is reedy in my ears. Its singer insists that we can keep growing. The singer hopes, prays that wanting more can be enough. But screams still echo through my eardrums. It's a false memory. I never heard her scream. Yet I feel her standing next to me, writhing, wailing, as I run back to my room and shut the door. In 2, 3, out 2, 3. I kneel, heaving. In 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. I will my heart to keep time with the music. Beat by beat passes, and Rachel comes into focus. A pen on my wrist, a snort of a laugh, a wink when our parents weren't looking. Just as I remember her. Just as she should be. "This is why I'm here," I whisper. "Rachel, I'm going to figure out who killed you."
Whew. Thank you for that, Abby.
Thank
And
you.
even through that moment, right, bringing us back to breath. And that's something we see. And I feel like it's
Yeah.
also really, really great to see, DJ engaging with a tool to manage what she's feeling. And she's feeling a lot, navigating a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to know if you could actually share what were some of the first images you had of DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T?
Oh my gosh. I actually had a really specific first image of DJ, this was in July 2020. I was in my parents' backyard in suburban Ohio. Um, there was absolutely nothing going on in the world in 2020, as we all remember. And I was sitting in my backyard processing some experiences and taking a moment. And I had this vision of a girl somewhat like my younger self, but not exactly like her, up on the bima, which is the platform in a synagogue, in a sanctuary, giving her Devar Torah, or her sermon, at her bat mitzvah about not just any lessons, not just any portion, but some of the lessons that I was learning about in real time. Um, and I think that image of this young Jewish girl giving a sermon about these lessons that I was really struggling to process myself was the entire book in a way. I've compared it to a tree and its branches because from that one image, I knew that so much of the book would be about her bat mitzvah and her relationship with Judaism. From that one image, I knew that the beginning and the end would be anchored in this ritual. From this one image, I knew the kinds of questions she would be wrestling with and could think about the kinds of resources she would need to lean on in order to do so, and also the tools that might need to be at her disposal, which eventually, long down the line, led to this sort of refrain of breath and centering herself that she has in the book, which is part of the book's portrayal of DJ's mental health in particular. And so it was such a specific first image of the book, but it really contains so much of the story there. And I think everything that's in the book you can read today goes back to that image.
And I'm curious for you, because yeah, honestly, that image itself feels so like,
Yeah.
thick. And what I'm marveling at your mind, right? To have this image and then also be like, oh yeah, that's the book. that seems so powerful.
I mean, it's a lot
um,
easier to say that in retrospect. Let me be clear. Like when it happened, I remember like texting a close friend of mine from childhood and saying like, I think I have an idea. Um, and so I knew it was an idea, but I didn't see all of those branches yet. There was so much story within it, like something I think is really special about the opportunity of a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah or a b'nai mitzvah, depending on your gender, um, is that one of the things that young people struggle with most is being taken seriously, right? And, bar and bat mitzvahs, b'nai mitzvahs are often represented in culture as a big party. It might come with a certain set of gifts or some family arrangements. But what I think is really special about them isn't just the opportunity to dive into ancient Jewish text and analyze it for yourself, but the opportunity and the commandment to stand in front of your congregation as a peer and deliver your sermon on that text. And on that day, everyone in that room has to take you as seriously as the rabbi. Everyone in that room has to consider you as an equal learned member of the congregation. And when we think about how rare that is for a 12 or 13-year-old, or in the case of DJ, 14, people do get bat mitzvah at different ages. It's a really special opportunity, and it contains such a profound sense of becoming that it just from that very first image felt perfect for this kind of coming of age story. And even if I took a little more time to see all the branches unfold, I think that sense of potential rooted in heritage really was plain from the beginning and really exciting to me.
Yeah, and it was definitely really enriching to read that. And I also want to spend time taking a look at that sense of coming of age, right? Of course, you have DJ going through this process of coming of age, but of course, not without the fact that it was postponed a year, right? So even that sense of delay because of death,
Mm-hmm.
because of that death of a close family member, is something that was really visible to me. And not only that, just paralleled with her cousin Rachel's passing at the age of 18, which is this other sort of
Yeah.
coming of age in American society. And to feel both of those at the same time, I think was a very heavy contrast, but I think also allowed for a lot of depth.
Thank
But
you.
I'm also curious to hear about your coming of age as an author and an artist, because in many ways, this book feels like a coming of age for you as an artist and author. Can you tell me more about how this book came through you, or at least through this time? Like, what do you think it was about this time that allowed you to sort of not only have that idea, but to really commit to it and see it through?
That's such a wonderful question because I do sometimes think that, if it were there are plenty of people who, have ideas or want to create art out of them, but it's really hard to find the precise alchemy to make it work. Um, in my case, DJ Rosenblum Becomes the G.O.A.T came out of a very specific experience of mine, which was that in January 2020, a dear friend of mine named Lisa passed away by suicide, and I had experienced grief before. I had lost loved ones and certainly experienced grief in my extended network, but um, I had never experienced something like that. And, that happened in late January. Um, by, 6 weeks later, mid-March, we were all quarantined in our homes. In my case, I went from this sort of exciting adult life I had built independently in DC back into my parents' home for an undetermined amount of time that turned into 7 months. And I also happened to be pretty ill at the time for unrelated reasons. And so there was this real feeling of being set back, and especially in being put back into a more childlike frame of mind and frame of working within the world, because I didn't have the same control of my life that I used to, because my parents and I fell back into a lot of our old habits about who did what within the house. And so I, and one of the most challenging things about that period of time was, I think in those intervening 6 weeks between when Lisa passed away and when I went home to my parents, I could do a lot of things to distract myself and avoid facing what I was feeling. And once I was home and could not see anyone and, could only sometimes work virtually at this new job I had started, all I could do was feel what was in my heart, which was a really bad way to feel. I can't say I recommend it. And so DJ came out of that very specific alchemy of experiences where it comes, first of all, I think, out of being set back into this younger frame of mind and state of being. It comes out of that feeling of delay, which I'm so glad you touched on. It comes out of that feeling more than anything of working through something as difficult as that. I mean, DJ really was initially part of my own personal therapy and how I got through that extremely difficult experience. And I think the reason why it, I think the reason why it felt like a book, the reason why it felt like a story that was fitting for me to write and for me to share with others is, as a writer, and I've been a writer for a long time in different genres, I really try to think about the questions of why now and why me. And the why now is often a little more self-evident because I think if the artist feels it immediately and immensely, that's your answer. It's why now. You have what's in you to write it. But the question of why me is a lot harder. I think a lot of times when I read and edit for other people that can be a little harder to elucidate. And this was the first time out of all of the story ideas I had ever had, this was the first time that I felt so deeply, this is my story to write. There were so many specific things about the character and her journey and the feelings she was dealing with that I hadn't quite seen before and that I was experiencing in such a direct way that I knew not just was it a full story, but it was my story to pen. Um, and so I think it grew naturally out of that. But I mean, grew naturally, but also with a lot of craft and work and help from readers and editors and great friends like Natachi. So um, it's a mix of hard work and just sort of when the moment is right. But it, in my case, it's a very specific book coming from a very specific time.
Thank you for that, Abby. And I remember talking to you earlier this year, and I just remember feeling you emanate this sense of purpose and power and joy. And it was related to this masterpiece. Yes.
You're so
And I
funny.
think it was also, oh, I'm telling the truth. I'm a very person. Okay, speaking of funniness though, the book is so funny. But we'll get back to that hopefully. But thinking back to that earlier conversation we had this year, I saw in you someone who felt super aligned in their purpose and empowered by it. And I feel like you found yourself doing things that you feel like would typically be a bit like spooky or out of reach for
Yeah.
Abby White. So can you tell me more about what this book has sort of empowered you to do in terms of stepping beyond what you thought were your limits
Oh my
and being
God.
bold to get this book into people's hands because you believe in how impactful and important it can be.
Yeah. I mean, in so many ways, I just feel like if not a different person, then a different font size or a different version of myself than I was a year ago. Because I truly, and if you've known me for long enough, you know this is true, and I was very frank about it. I've never considered myself a brave person. I, sorted myself into every Hogwarts house besides Gryffindor, and I, have very risk averse, very cautious as a person. Um, I inherited a wonderful ability to worry. Hello, my parents. And so I've just always been really reluctant to take big swings or do things out of my comfort zone, and especially to do things that would put me in a potentially perilous position. And this book, I think, allowed me to connect to a part of myself within myself that I hadn't been listening to well for a long time. Because I think there were things I was doing with this book that I had always wanted to do and maybe not been brave enough. Um, and the resulting book was so wonderful. I mean, like to this day, when I read this book, I love it and it's my favorite. It was so wonderful, and I could step outside of myself and see and feel so objectively how wonderful it was that I just desperately wanted to share it with people. And I think especially because it, you know, came out of such a tough experience for me, I'm so, so passionate about trying to make sure it's accessible for other people going through grief or mental health that might need a book like this, because I couldn't find it when I needed it. And all of that drove me to just do things that if you had asked 2 years ago, 3 years ago, certainly longer than that, I never would have imagined. I mean, I had a very secure, well-paying job here in DC that I was incredibly lucky to have, which I left earlier this year. I went on SNAP and Medicaid, which were programs that I had never used directly before. And that was a journey. I think honestly, I had to overcome some stigma to do that. But it was absolutely the right choice for me. I planned and then embarked upon a cross-country book tour. I flew from DC to San Francisco, rented a car, and drove all the way back to DC in order to share this book with people. I did a master's program. I graduated with my MFA in August. I mean, there were just so many ways that thank you. There are just so many ways that I tried something new and invested in something far less than certain, that I would have hesitated to previously. But I feel better than I have in years. I think there's just a sort of certainty of purpose inside of me that you, of course, notice because you're the most attentive, intuitive person. And it really has changed the way I think about choices and think about my own life, but also in how I try to advise friends and think of possibilities. Because there are just so many different kinds of fulfillment, I guess is how I think of it. And there are some kinds that are much more present in my life now than they used to be, even as some other things have been lost. And I'm really grateful to have discovered how brave I can be. It's a total 180 from how I ever thought about myself as a young person, but I can do really hard, brave things. And that's a really wonderful, enriching thing to know about myself.
I love that so much. And just that sense of possibility that you're both feeling, but also I think radiating both through the message you just said right now, but also through this book. DJ does some questionable things as well.
She
I don't
does.
recommend all the things that DJ
No,
does.
nor do I. My sweet girl.
But I think DJ is also in a space where she does things that she didn't really imagine possible. I think
Yeah.
for better and worse at times, right? But also just a part of
Yeah.
this larger process of what breathing can mean and look
Yeah.
like. Where your logic is and your sense of the world is shifted so vastly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think my experience of grief and certainly amplified by the fact that the entire world changed overnight shortly after I entered my grief experience. But I think any profound loss and grief really does change the world that you live in. It really does change the earth beneath you and the taste of the air around you and the feeling of water against your fingers because it's chemical, right? It's a totally chemical shift. And I tried to convey that through DJ in a lot of different ways. One of them was just that, there's on a very craft-based level, because I'm quite the nerd about writing craft, there's a chapter that is shorter and more abstract in trying to sort of evoke this sense of shifting worlds that she has felt through her grief experience, and the way that shock can dislodge what you thought you knew. Um, and then certainly into the decisions she's made in this book. I mean, she is like fundamentally a good kid, a smart kid who tests her own limits, shall we say, in this book. As you said, some for better, some for worse, some definitely for worse. There are things she does in this book that I don't think even now I would do. But that's part of becoming, right? Like that's part of figuring out who you can be, and who you want to be, right? It's not just a question of fate and who you're meant to be, but who you want to be, because we have agency over who we become. And she has this profound, horrible experience that changes the way she saw the world and felt within it. And this book, in many ways, is seeing how a person who goes through that then decides what to do next. Um, and I don't think she has all the answers, but I'm really proud of the journey that she goes on by the end of the book. And I think it's a real tribute to the fact that, as cautious and risk averse as I happen to be, sometimes we need to take these risks and try big things, take big swings in order to take the next step in that process of becoming. And even if when it's difficult and bad, it is part of the journey.
Absolutely. And I actually would love to get into some pre-submitted audience questions. You know, talking about the journey, why not, right? It is a part of thinking about what's a part of the journey.
Yeah.
And I want us to think about what's been a part of this journey for you, okay? Bringing this to life. I love holding this book. I really do. And
You hold it so much better than I do. Every time I'm just like, hello.
Oh,
And
no,
you're so
no, no. You're
graceful
doing
about
great.
it.
There's so many ways to hold a book. Okay.
I had to be coached into not covering the title of this book when I held it. Because I was just
Really?
yes, there were just so many photos that finally somebody took me aside and said, in every photo of you holding this book, you're covering the title, and I need you to stop it because it's driving me nuts. And you know who you are. I don't think you're on this webinar, but shout out to you because I
The
do think
life
about
of
it
a
now.
professional author.
It's real, little things, little things. But anyways, actual question.
Hey, it's related. It's related, okay? So we have Jennifer, Columbia College 2025. Congratulations, Jennifer. Okay,
Congratulations.
fresh out. And Jennifer's question is, how do you actually get your book published?
Oh
As
my
in, what is the
gosh.
process to get your book in a contract so that it's on shelves in stores like Barnes& Noble?
Yes. This is a great question, and I will tell you my own specific journey, but I will say writ large, one of the things that's been most surprising to me as I've gotten to know other authors is how different everybody's journey is. And so most people follow this sort of basic template of, you write a great book, you find agents looking for something similar, and you submit it to them through queries, as they're called, with a query letter and a sample. Hopefully, one or more agents responds that they're interested in the book. You sign a contract with them. They have some editors in mind for it from publishing houses. They submit it to them, and if an editor acquires it, then that's when you have a contract. You're in business. You're going to be published, and hopefully get onto shelves at a bookstore near you. So that's the order in which things are supposed to go. And what I had every intention of doing for myself. But what I found in my own experience and in talking to a lot of other authors, especially today, is that it can be a lot more random than that. Mine certainly was. In my case, I started my MFA, which was based at the University of Nevada, Reno. Freudian slip in the company. In August 2023, with a full draft of DJ, thinking that I would use the 2-year duration of the program to edit it, polish it, by the end of that time, send it off to agents. And so I said this to my mentor my first semester, and she said, sounds good. Why don't you, send me what you have and we'll start thinking about how to edit it. I sent it to her. And a couple weeks later, she wrote back and said, "Oh, this is done. So you and I are gonna polish it. We are gonna make some edits, but we're gonna polish it, and then you're gonna submit it to agents." And I said, "LOL," because I didn't know that would be happening. But if there's one thing I'm gonna do, it's my homework, and so I did do it. And this mentor also encouraged me to go out and meet other authors, try to meet editors, publishers, really just like involve myself more in the literary world. To that end, I attended the National Jewish Book Conference in November 2023. And, those are held for the purposes of learning and networking. And I reached out to some people afterwards, and one of those people ended up actually making me, they were an editor from Living Corrido, which is a small but renowned children's publisher. And they ended up making me an offer for the book before I even had an agent. And so in my case, I ended up going to agents and saying, "Hi, I have this offer for publication already. What do I do?" And was able to choose a really wonderful, esteemed agent, and have been very well taken care of since then. I'm really happy with how everything turned out. But I have other friends who, maybe who were publishing articles under their name or under a pen name, and an agent reached out to them to say, "Hey, I really like your work. Have you thought about writing a book?" I know other people who have done it the really traditional way of like they've spent 5 to 10 years working on a book, and they've sent it to any agent they could think of, and finally one said yes. I have others who spent a long time on a manuscript and it wasn't getting any bites, so they put it down, they started something else, and that something else got picked up pretty quickly. So it goes so differently for everybody. And I was honestly like, I had a much easier go of it than I ever expected to, which I think just a tribute to how helpful and generous all of the people in my life are. Because I, would not have felt comfortable doing these things without their support or encouragement or insistence via grading. So I don't know how helpful my own journey is for people hoping to publish their own books, but what I think and hope is helpful is the reminder that it goes differently for everybody. And so sort of figure out what you need, what you're missing in your writing life, and try to pursue that. And that it's always helpful to be in the companies of other writers and editors and publishing industry people. They will always have the best connections and the best advice and the best feedback. And so do whatever you can to join those communities.
Thank you so much for that, Abby. That was a thorough response. And I also just, I mean, I love the aspect of you had this specific intention for MFA, and I'm glad you got there. And but you were able to sort of just be ready with your book a lot sooner than you thought.
Yeah.
And actually, this is actually pretty, I think, connected to a question that we have from one of the audience members. Just that nature in terms of thinking that your book needs more work,
Yeah.
right? And then someone's like, "Oh, babes, that's ready." Okay. But let me read this question. So thank you so much. We have a current student actually who is going to be Columbia College 2028. So hello to you.
Amazing. Welcome.
And the text writes, "I recently had an experience that made me realize how insecure I am about my writing. I tried to take a more constructive approach with one of my pieces, but my professor graded it in a way that felt really personal. It's hard, especially as a student, when writing is constantly being evaluated and everyone seems to have a different opinion. Most people tell me my writing is great, but if even one person says it isn't, I start to spiral. Did you ever feel this way about your writing, especially as a student? If so, how did you move past it?"
Yes, huge yes. I thank you for this question, student, and thank you so much for joining. I have felt so much insecurity about my writing over the years. I think in my case, I always felt confident sort of on a craft lens. I always felt confidence in my ability to put together a sentence that sounded good, where my insecurity often laid was in the art side of it, right? Like what am I trying to say and what is my artistic vision and what even genre do I want to write? When I did major in creative writing at Columbia, but I double concentrated in fiction and nonfiction, which is a great way to say that I had no idea. Um, and I think that so, I mean, that's the first answer is yes, certainly. I have felt that insecurity all writers have, and if they say they haven't, they either forgot or they're lying to you. Um, but I think it's such a hard thing too, where, it's we like to think that if we write something well, then anyone who reads it will think that it's good. And that's not always the case. A question that I try to ask myself when I'm reading or evaluating somebody else's writing is, who is the ideal reader for this? Because the ideal reader for this may not be me, right? I think especially I write for young people. This is a young adult novel. I read a lot of middle grade and young adult novels. I am not between the ages of 12 to 18 anymore. And so like there's a certain level of transference that I think someone evaluating a work has to do. And I think that attitude about how to approach a work that you're evaluating is a little new. I don't, it's something that I learned from my mentors in my MFA program, but it certainly wasn't always my experience. And I have heard from plenty of other people that their workshops did not have that kind of focus either. So, what I think I would tell a student who is really struggling with the feelings of insecurity they have about their writing and with the kinds of criticism they're getting from certain people, be they professors or classmates, what have you, about the writing, is first of all, that's normal. That's where all of us start. And you are not behind the curve or doing anything wrong by feeling that way. Second, that your responsibility is to write something that is meaningful to you and that speaks to your ideal reader. And you should have an idea in your head of who your ideal reader is. They might be similar to you, they might not be. But I think it's helpful to really anchor yourself in that question of who is this, of, why now and why me and who is this for? Because it can help sort of buttress you against some of the criticism that maybe is not in as good faith as you would hope. And the last thing I would say is that something I've learned over years of editing myself, but also in being edited, is that whenever people suggest a change when they're editing writing, you should not take the change they're suggesting as the answer. What you should notice is that they've noticed something that maybe doesn't work quite right? So like if there's a paragraph where an editor has suggested like, I think you should change this to the second person. That's an absurd suggestion. You can't just change narrative. Yeah. But let's say that they did. That doesn't mean that you as the writer have to change it to the second person. That means that something within the paragraph doesn't feel quite of a piece with the rest of the story, or maybe there's a perspective that isn't quite coming out enough. And so all you need to take from that piece of criticism is, let me dive deeper into this and try to notice what might be off here, what they might be sensing, and then apply your fix to it. Or not. You might decide something is off intentionally, right? That's always a part of it. So I think everything I'm describing is easier said than done. I think I've only become good at dealing with criticism this way within the past year, and I've been writing for much longer than that. And I wrote DJ before that to give you an idea of like how much you can accomplish even when you're still feeling insecure and not sure how to deal with that feedback. But I really think thinking of it as a conversation and not just sort of criticism from one side to the other can be helpful in sort of navigating that and being really centered in your story and why now, why me, who's it for? can help buttress you instead of in some of that and also focus your work in a helpful way. I hope that's helpful, and I really encourage you to keep writing because if you're it must be good. If you're working this hard on it and you're paying this much attention to it, it must be good, and I'd love to read it one day.
Thank you for that, Abby. I'm thinking we have time for one more question. Maybe another half of the question after, but let's get this next one
Okay.
going in. And I'm excited for this next question, pre-submitted by Sukmita from CC’19,
OMG,
one of our
hello.
sweet mates from our freshman year of college, which I love to see. So hi, Susmi.
Hi,
And
Susie.
the question is, what has been one or some of the most rewarding moments while you've been on the road slash touring your book?
Oh my gosh. There have been so many. I think like the road trip was so important to me, not just professionally, but personally. I wanted to see more of the country. I think I was looking for some locus of hope and faith in America beyond politics, given the current state of things. And I wanted to meet more people, see more communities, connect with readers, and I feel like there were so many special parts of it. The landscapes were so beautiful, from like the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah to the mountains in Nevada, and just like roving plains and prairies in like Nebraska and Kansas. Um, I did half the trip with my dad, who, we really loved being able to spend that quality time together. That was really special for us. And I got to see a lot of baby elephants on that trip. Pro tip, there are a lot of baby elephants in the United States right now, which is also important to me. But I think the most special thing was, especially being in DC, I have a really easy vantage point into the federal government. I have a lot of friends who either work for or have worked for the federal government in some capacity, and it's very bleak there, to put it lightly. And it was so wonderful and rewarding on my trip to see the ways communities were coming together to support one another and enact positive change for themselves, even in the face of this dysfunction and rising despotism and fascism on a federal level. I was able to visit a queer youth center in Omaha, Nebraska that's doing incredible work to support like queer and trans youth and some adults in their communities. I was able to visit Left Bank bookstore in St. Louis, which has a foundation attached that does really wonderful things to support their low income and unhoused communities in the city. There were just so many points where I felt like I was seeing the change happening that we're being told increasingly is impossible. And it gave me such hope and inspiration that I think about it all the time as I try to get through all of this. And I feel like there are 1,000 stories there, not all of them for me to tell, but stories that I really hope to read and see one day. So that's got to be the most special part for me, which is saying a lot because the elephants were really cute.
I believe that. I believe
Yeah.
that, Abby. And actually, it looks like we can get another last question in here.
Okay.
And this is submitted from Hayden, who's on the call now. Hey, Hayden. And Hayden's question is, now that you've successfully published DJ, what's keeping you creative right now, and how are you honoring that?
Hi, Hayden. What's keeping me creative right now at some level is, the fact that I'm trying to make a career out of this and not just a hobby. And, that relationship between livelihood and, fun fulfillment is one I'm continuing to navigate. Um, but I think that I'm feeling most creatively driven by the fact that and this is, part of why I've always loved writing and wanted to write and wanted to be an author, is that I am constantly asking questions and overthinking things and trying to learn about new parts of life or facets of life or ways of living. And I think writing and especially books remain the best way, for me at least, to do that. And the one other thing I'll add is I really do feel mission driven about writing for young people. I know that I am the person I am today, mostly or in large part because of what I read when I was young. And if I can have even, a very, very, very small role in that for young people now, then I will feel like I have fulfilled my purpose. So.
Well, thank you for walking in your purpose, Abby. I personally feel better for it, inspired by it, emboldened by it, emotional by it.
Stop.
But I'm also grateful that I'm your friend, and then I could have such deep conversations about your book. Because I'm like, oh, this is great access to an author of an amazing book. So thank you so
Listen,
much.
it's amazing and vice versa. And I also have to say for the people, since I suspect you will not say it yourself, you have an amazing immersive concert experience happening in Sacramento on November 15th, I think it is. Fire Breathing in
This
the
is true.
Wild. Fire Breathing in the Wild, tickets available. Natachi is the most incredible performer, writer, poet, visionary I've ever known, as you can see glimpses of here. If you are in Sacramento on the 15th or in the area, please, please go. I am so sad I haven't been able to see it yet, but it's going to be an incredible show.
Thank you so much, Abby. And TJ, thank you so much for joining us again. I will toss it back to you.
Yes. Thank you so much. It was such a fun conversation, and I felt like I got to be in your all's dorm room and just getting to know each of you so much more. Obviously, we knew each other at Columbia, and so honored to have you both on today. You both were some of the most brilliant people that I met there. So thank you both so much for your time. And a big thank you as well to all the alumni, students, and friends who have joined us here on this wonderful discussion this evening. Our alumni community is a lifelong resource and a shared home base for you. It's really where mentorships take root, collaborations begin, and many doors can open for careers, for your creative projects, and for service. So please stay connected and make sure that you amplify your impact to allow us to carry forward the values that we shared on campus into our wider world. We would love to keep this momentum going from this wonderful event. Please join our upcoming programs at Columbia College Women. Invite a classmate of yours or volunteer your time and expertise. If you would like to get more involved, please reach out to me at ccwomen@columbia.edu. We'd love to have your assistance as a volunteer on our board. And thank you all so much for spending part of your evening with us. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much. Bye.
Bye, thank
Go
you.
buy the book. Go buy the book.